Hello and welcome everyone to Red Planet Live. I am your host, Ashton Zeth. I'm elated to be hosting the Mars Society's podcast and leading the conversation about human exploration of the universe and the future settlement of Mars. As a longtime space enthusiast, I am passionate about STEM education and making humanity an interplanetary species. Thank you everybody for joining today and supporting Red Planet Live. Going to kick off today with just a quick reminder. As you may know by this point, Red Planet Live, we are updating our schedule for just a couple months from January to April. Those episodes are being pre-recorded. For those couple months, I'm going to be taking some time off for maternity leave. So during that time, RPL will go back to a one-time per month release schedule, and those episodes are pre-recorded. So thank you so much for your continued support and being a part of the community. I'm excited to bring you these conversations during the transition, but excited as well to return to our regular schedule later in the year. So going to jump right into introductions today. I'm excited to be speaking with Casey Dreier from the Planetary Society. He leads the Planetary Society's advocacy and policy efforts to advance planetary exploration, planetary defense, and the search for life. He educates and empowers the organization's members to take political action. He writes, teaches, and speaks to the Planetary Society's members, the public, policymakers, to impress upon them the importance and the relevancy and the excitement of space exploration. Casey is committed to demystifying the politics and policy process behind space exploration for all audiences. He is a trusted source for journalists and has been featured in many publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, Scientific American, Fox, The Verge, just to name a few. He has also appeared as an expert on the BBC News and both seasons of National Geographic's Mars series as a Mars Big Thinker. He also leads the strategic planning for the Planetary Society Space Policy and Advocacy Program. He worked closely with the Society's leadership, its board of directors, and other policy experts to craft the organization's formal positions and goals for the future of space exploration. He provides trusted analysis of the budgetary, political, and policy decisions related to space, pursues original research, and works collectively to generate policy ideas and guidance for the U.S. space program. He also, again, as if there wasn't another also, there's one more. He also is the host of the podcast Planetary Radio, Space Policy Edition, which has been published monthly since 2016. He, lastly, holds a degree in physics with a concentration in astronomy from Oberlin College. Casey, also, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I need to shorten that
bio. I sometimes we make little tweaks here and there, but I was like, there's too much good stuff in here. I don't want to take anything away. So I left the whole thing in there. Happy to read it all. I love a little tongue twister that gets
good context. Yes, right. It's certainly a challenge for that. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.
Excited to be chatting with you today. Well, to kick it off, we do a segment on the podcast called Question of the Day. It's just meant to be an icebreaker. I promise there's no right or wrong answer. Just want to hear your opinion. Because you work in space policy and you're a space communicator, I would love to know from your perspective, if you could enact any space policy, what would it be and why? No rules. It's you get to pick it. Nobody's going to tell you no. It's not going to get shot down in Congress.
It's just an innocent question. Definitely no pitfalls in saying something.
I'm sure you've had to have thought about this at some point, right?
What interest group could I upset with this? What a wonderful question. I mean, I think I would say the policy would be to form, to declare the search for life as the top organizing principle for space scientific activities, particularly exploratory space activities, and to create a whole of government approach, integrating search for life through origins of life here on Earth, geology, planetary systems, all the way then through theoretical genetics, biology and health studies. Department of Energy have ways to contribute to it, and then have this broad integrative approach with funding mechanisms for all these disciplines to then say that they get their own mission line within the space agency that develops the capability to then do in situ and vast statistically valid searches for life using all manner of electromagnetic spectrum. So I would say the search for life organizing principle of space exploration would be my policy.
I love it. Okay, so you have to have thought about this at some point. I mean, this was not a out of left field type of question.
I mean, it's one. Yes, idly, it's kind of everyone has their. If I were not even just NASA, like master of NASA or head of total control,
Yeah.
um, I mean, it's something you kind of toy about too, as you can make a case for that within the existing structure
Mhm.
of how the space agency works. And the trick is always, there's lots of other things that NASA and science does that's not directly related to space science.
Right.
You don't want to not do those.
Right.
But just as this kind of singular focus, I think would be really exciting and clarifying. And also, I think, the search for life is such a big question.
Mhm.
As I kind of outlined, it's a theoretical question. It's a question of emergent systems,
Right.
computational aspects, issues with a lot of relevant stuff in terms of, and I'm really interested in the biological and health kind of funding and understanding of cellular systems and it's such vast. And then of course, how do you actually do it? The technological development of it, the development and the role and expansion of planetary defense is actually serves as kind of an interesting example of how to do this in the modern age, where planetary defense didn't exist even as a concept before the early 1980s.
Mhm.
And of course, we learned it wasn't until it was Shoemaker who really established that craters were from big things that smack onto the moon and elsewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, that was very much within a single person's lifetime, that has become established fact, and then that it happened on Earth and that it could cause extinction level events and that we should care about this. There's this, and even after we knew that, starting in the pretty confidently in the 1990s and started looking for asteroids through Space Guard, it took another 15 years before NASA could be forced, kind of against its will,
Yeah.
to say maybe we should have actual spacecraft dedicated to this.
Mhm.
And now we're just, DART was the first of that, Neo Surveyor will be the second. But that was a 40-year travel. But at the end of the day, we shoehorned this new, it's not quite science, it's not human spaceflight, it's kind of a new responsibility for NASA into the agency's set of responsibilities and into its bureaucratic structure to support missions. And I think Search for Life needs something like that, because otherwise it just becomes like a nice rhetorical thing that you can splash on any old mission, even
Mhm.
if it's not really a search for life mission, or they don't have to be all life detection, but without having some sort of bureaucratic heft behind it, it's easy to kind of get lost in all the other interests pulling these things together. So
Mhm.
yes, I guess the answer is yes. I have thought about this a little bit.
I would assume, yeah, within your role that'd be something that you've considered quite a bit. Well, thinking about that search for life, does is it safe to assume that yourself and the Planetary Society are eager to see those samples from the Perseverance rover come back to Earth, and we officially know for certain that there is potential life on the surface of Mars or not,
Yes,
or beneath the surface? Excuse me.
yeah, I mean, or even if there was, right? I mean, evidence of ancient life that's no longer there is still
Hmm.
pretty profound. Yes, absolutely. And I think there's surprised that there hasn't been a bigger push since that announcement came out a couple months ago. Say like in the ensconced safely in one of our sample tubes right now in NASA's rover is the most promising potential biosignature that we know about, and it's there. We know exactly where. We don't have to look for it. It's right there. We just have to get it back.
Hmm.
That should really have redoubled our efforts to figure out our sample return. And the fact that there seems to have been no movement whatsoever on that is kind of shocking when you think about it. And I'm hoping that maybe some leadership at NASA is now able to kind of take advantage of opportunities like that more,
Hmm.
rather than say, "Oh well, what are you going to do?" Right, and just say like that. That seems to be our current policy. Is like, well, that would have been nice to have potentially discovered life, evidence of life on Mars. Well, I don't know. What are you going to do? Money's tight.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, speaking of leadership at NASA, that's a hot topic right now. I'm going to jump around a little bit on my questions here, but obviously the most exciting and most recent news is about the nomination and confirmation of Jared Isaacman to lead NASA. I'm curious, What's your perspective on his nomination, and what does this signal about the future direction of NASA?
It'll be interesting because I believe we're recording this in the past, and so
Yeah,
something as wild has happened. But at the moment, as he's just being confirmed, I think he's going to bring a lot of energy in a way that we have not seen in NASA leadership in a
yeah,
while, which I think will be maybe a, maybe take some getting used to. And I think it's going to be good, but it may just be disruptive in a way that people aren't used to.
yeah.
Um, I think he's going to bring high expectations for performance, and I think that's really important to reinstill. Not even talking about necessarily civil servants, but contractors,
Mhm.
and being able to have these expectations and mixed with that energy, um, you know, really trying to shake. I hate that phrase, but just the idea that you can you know, we should all have high expectations for our national space program.
Mhm.
He's going to be coming into a serious trust deficit based on the actions of this administration,
Mhm.
both with the staff at the agency, its scientific community, and contractors and everyone kind of in the space community. Not his fault, but he is going to be responsible for reestablishing that trust.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure he knows that, but I hope we see some actions soon to kind of build to increase transparency, clarify goals, and then also have some sort of kind of coherent policy, which would be, I think really valuable at this point. And being able to fight for NASA internally in this administration in a way that it hasn't been able to with these caretaker administrators that don't have that empowered position by which to argue for the agency's interests. So,
Mhm.
I'm relatively optimistic. I think there's a lot of open questions about ultimately, he says a lot of good things. There's a lot of changes he would make. Change is great to everybody on purpose, in theory until it starts to be applied, and so we'll see exactly what those changes are.
Yeah.
But I think he's coming to this with a good intention and a desire to make a good impact. And so we want this to work. I think everyone wants this to work.
Course. Yeah, yeah, we're
And I'm
all
just
in this
grateful we don't have a really
together.
divisive person there. He's just by nature, anyone who's met him, he's not a very divisive person at all, which is really important for the agency.
Yeah, I agree with you. Optimistic about his nomination, and today again we're recording in the past for a future his confirmation today. When I get to talk with people that maybe are outside the space industry, or they're not as familiar with what's going on, trying to give a snippet or an overview of who he is, even if you've never met him. Some of the things that I tend to highlight is that he's a fresh perspective. He's
Mhm.
not a career politician. He hasn't been a senator, and he hasn't served in government at this level before. He comes from private sector, selling his company super young, having gotten his private pilot license, and gone the citizen astronaut route. He has a different perspective, and coming from industry, I think is going to be helpful. We've seen that be successful in other areas, somebody coming from the outside. And again, the expectations are probably higher. Operating with, how do we say this nicely? Again, your expectations, doing more with less, working more efficiently. I think those are going to be expectations. And if you ignore all of that, what I would tell people, he just seems like a genuinely nice guy. I love that he's
Mhm.
philanthropic, that he runs marathons, that he's posting about, spending time with his daughters. I mean, he seems just like a genuinely nice human being.
Yeah.
And that it seems hard to come by as well. So somebody
I
like
wish
that.
that wasn't a notable thing for yes, but yeah, he does, and I agree with that. I think the concern among particularly some in the scientific community is he going to give the same level of attention to science?
Mhm,
I'd say his natural interests and inclinations are obviously in human spaceflight.
right.
Um, but he said a lot of good things about it, right? But at the end of the day, you can only prioritize, certain
So
things
much.
over others.
Yeah.
And is he going to be able to apply some of these? Does efficiency mean just less science, or can you actually enable more science? So there's a lot of factional contrasts in this administration.
Mhm,
So you have a situation where through executive orders, um, led by the Office of Management and Budget by Russ Vought. You've actually been adding layers of bureaucracy to the actions of giving scientific grants, scientific review. You've removed, you've added a political review that's opaque and unpredictable to the scientific peer review process.
Mhm.
And you've added just really stifling levels of bureaucracy to just draw down money on grants that scientists have approved, need to be signed off by like 6 new people at NASA every time. They have to justify X, Y, and Z,
Okay.
which is anti-efficiency, right? By design to
Right.
slow the flow of money going out. So you have the administration simultaneously adding layers of bureaucracy to slow down science.
Mhm.
And Isaacman can't control that. I mean, he's the administrator of NASA, unless he can convince the White House or some, the Office of Management Budget to lay off those activities.
Mhm.
They're simultaneously adding bureaucracy at the same time saying they want to make things more efficient. And so, how do you reconcile those two? I don't know. I hope he does, and this is where I think having an advocate for this is going to help, and having someone who has that both been blessed by Senate confirmation, but also been appointed and has, won his way back into Trump's heart, I suppose,
Yeah.
to be nominated again
Mhm.
can maybe help with that. But so there's a lot of challenges like that he's going to face, where again, his own administration that he's now part of is at cross purposes in a number of ways for a number of motivating factors.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I was gonna ask you about that as well. Uh, we could hope that his relationship with Trump, his relationship with SpaceX and Elon Musk, would be a benefit here. Um, but on the flip side of that coin, it could also be potentially harmful. Do we think at this moment that, I mean, obviously he's been nominated twice at this point by Trump, that it's going to be a benefit to have that partnership, that relationship with Trump, that maybe may be able to do and accomplish those things that otherwise might have additional hurdles, that bureaucracy that we are talking about.
I would say probably the broad understanding of this administration is if you have the president's affection and support, you can basically do much more of your own agenda under
Mhm.
that support.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you can't. And so winning that support and winning that ongoing, uh, uh, I guess, deference is going to be one of those. It's almost like a royal court, politics, where you have to like gain the favor of the king, unfortunately. But that's kind of where the politics are around that.
Mhm.
And so the more he has that, and there's a version, and that's maybe the extreme way of framing it. And there's a version of that that's true for every NASA administrator. The more that you can be seen as a proxy for presidential approval, kind of, or support, or that you're there acting on the president's priorities, the easier it's always going to be for you against there's always a factional, challenges within a White House like this. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I think that's going to be a big part. And so clearly he's figured out a way to get back into the president's good graces. And one, I'd say, the more remarkable political turnarounds that we've seen in this
Mhm.
last year. And he's done that still kind of while maintaining this reputation of among the broader space community, right? No easy task necessarily.
Mhm.
Appealing to the president and getting back in his good graces could have easily cost him all of the Democratic votes, which he still got a number of them. So
Right.
he's been
Right.
walking a good line. I imagine he's a lot wiser in the ways of these politics than he was when he was first nominated.
For
And I
sure.
think that maybe speaks to what could be he'll have some serious learning experience. He's kind of,
Learning
as you
curve.
said, he's this outsider coming in.
Mhm.
And that's gives you advantages and disadvantages. Usually, I think what would be interesting is his deputy, who still has yet to be nominated, is also not an insider.
Yeah.
Um, so it'll see how navigating this kind of new terrain and internal politics and regional politics, and making sure Ted Cruz is happy with you is also really important as well,
Mhm.
given his role in the Senate Commerce Committee. um, so you have a number of people to please, and
Mhm.
I imagine he's the type of person, though, he seems to learn very quickly and
Mhm.
probably really gets, excited by it's just the person who, like, runs 3 marathons, before breakfast and then goes and, flies a fighter jet and then does X, Y, and then
Yeah, and then volunteers at his daughter's school and
yeah, yeah, that's a level of energy I wish I had. I
right?
consider him an inbox zero kind of guy, and which is something I've never even come close to achieving in my tenure on this earth. So I
Mhm.
think it'll be really fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
You were talking about uh, his kind of outsider status. That I'd say the closest comparison is to when Dan Golden came into NASA in the 1990s. He
Okay.
came in from I think TRW, so he was an executive.
Mhm.
He wanted to run NASA more like a business. He wanted to focus on efficiency. And, there's a lot of strange, interesting parallels between that era. NASA lost 20% of its workforce in the 1990s.
Mhm.
NASA's budget went down through overall cuts to government spending. These were nowhere near as dramatic. They
Mhm.
were done over the course of 5 years. The reductions and the
Yeah.
workforce reductions, and with the explicit blessing of Congress first, before doing X, Y,
Yeah.
but regardless, you have NASA was shrinking, its budget was shrinking, and his job was to say we do more with less. And
Mhm.
you got your better, faster, cheaper approaches, which despite I'd say ending maybe poorly, get maybe a little unfairly maligned in retrospect. They returned some really exciting science, and some of the very very high in a sense science per dollar missions came from better, faster, cheaper era.
Mhm.
Um, and he brought that. He was also by all accounts, a very demanding boss. He showed up at like 5 in the morning, left at 10 at night. He could steamroll over a lot of people. People loved him or hated him, Dan Golden. But he was there for I think like 10 years, right? So he made a huge mark at the agency. Jared
Mhm.
doesn't have the luxury of that much time. And
Mhm.
I think the other thing that Jared's going to have to worry about is how do I hand off the changes I want to make to a subsequent administrator,
Mm.
right?
Okay.
And so he'll have 3 years. Um, I mean, it's possible he could continue on under the second Republican administration,
Yeah.
but certainly not guaranteed. I think Golden is the only person who actually, trying to think out loud, I think Dan Golden is the only person in the modern era who he was first came on NASA under George H.W. Bush and then stayed into all through Clinton's years.
Mhm. Made that
Um,
transition through administrations.
Yeah, so it's rare to do that. So it's all about, who do I pass this baton off to, and will they want it? And so,
Mhm.
um, that's always the tricky thing. So how does he set up and do a lot of change while building coalitional support to make those changes enduring is gonna be a big challenge.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like they're big expectations, big shoes to fill there. Um,
Mhm.
are you, in your experience, are you starting to see that shift for other other roles within the government, other specific positions within NASA, like the move from traditional politician, bureaucrat to now we're bringing in outsiders, those from private industry, those that have been executives, like you see with Elon, for example. I mean, running SpaceX and then
Mhm.
coming to Doge. Are we seeing a little bit more of that shift now? Again, the do more, do more for less, cut costs, work more efficiently across the.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I think that's kind of the moment we're in, and it's certainly kind of aligned with the broad anti-establishment, mood of particularly the Republican Party.
Mhm,
But and that's just by nature then going to choose outsiders, and I think already we can see the mixed bag you get with that, when
mhm,
you have people come in with not a lot of expertise. I think the key thing here that is maybe the source of, success, um, is the temperament, which we've already kind of talked about, and the desire, like, does he respect the agency that he's gonna run? A lot of the outsiders at these other agencies clearly do not, and
mhm,
bring in a level of kind of vindictive, long simmering whatever issues and take it out on the agencies that they're tasked with
mhm,
stewarding. Um, that's obviously not the case with Isaacman, and so we are, in a sense, very fortunate that we have a person in this outsider context who clearly wants NASA to be great, and respects the history of it and wants to. I kind of see it as I would say that he's like a tech, entrepreneur taking over a troubled asset,
Yeah.
right? And so he's that I would guess that's like one way to kind of see it in terms of model how he sees NASA.
Hmm.
And that means he could love it, and he might see his job as to turn this troubled asset around.
Right. Yeah.
That may
Just,
be painful and it could do stuff, but he's probably doing it with what he sees as best intentions, and I
yeah.
think, again, I take him at his word for that. He's gonna be more constrained by Congress and the administration than he's used to being, as the boss.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but I think there is a fundamental respect for the agency, and that makes a huge difference, plus the temperament, and it seems like so far, a willingness to take input. And
Hmm.
again, so this will be really all this will be, who knows, by the time we hear this,
Right.
we'll
Right.
have a lot more clarity on this.
Yeah.
But this is at the moment it stands. So I think most people are just happy to have somebody who is, as you said, a decent seeming person and
Right.
it does not committed to destroying the agency he's now tasked with running.
From the outside, it can look like, the type of person that would be in that role is, not somebody who cares deeply about the mission. But Jared seems to be, again, just a decent human being, and that's what we hope for when we all have so much pride in NASA, and it's the golden child of all the different agencies. I mean, nobody's looking at the Department of Transportation. I'm like, oh, I've always wanted to work there. Like, everybody dreams about working at NASA and being a part of it, and seeing the amazing missions.
People
And
walk around with
I
NASA's logo on a t-shirt, right?
exactly, you can go to different countries and you see people wearing NASA. It has that allure, and
Mhm.
he seems like a good person to be in that position. So again, when this airs, we'll see how much is
Yeah, so
changed, or maybe it's the same.
yep.
We talked about NASA budget, and
Mhm.
obviously that's going to be a sticking point when Jared gets into this role full time. What do we do with that budget? I know that earlier in 2025, the Planetary Society and the Mars Society mobilized in response to the proposed NASA budget cuts, and were advocating for protection of those science missions. Can you walk us through that strategy? What were the efforts that were taking place in DC, and any results that came of those efforts?
Yeah. Great time to ask me this. I was literally just putting together our impact report for the year.
Perfect. Perfect
Um,
timing.
and actually, maybe I can you can link to that in the show notes here. This really was an extraordinary year. The both in terms of the cuts that we mentioned, right? That
Mhm.
they are literally the largest single year cuts percentage wise ever proposed for NASA, and certainly for NASA science, cutting it in half. Like that's level of cuts you don't do for good stewardship or cost savings. Those are going out of business level cuts, fire sales cuts, um, and so that sparked, I think, an extraordinary response, and I think it was a very in and it was very encouraging, I think, to see the broad community response, not just with Mars Society, but just across we had professional scientific societies like AAS and NAGU. We had Commercial Space Federation join letters with us and share our message. We had labor unions. We had other public interest groups, pro science groups. So ultimately, we had a coalition of about 20
Yeah.
organizations, and that's really powerful. Sometimes it's like when you are threatened with losing something, you realize how precious it is.
Yeah.
And I think that hit a lot of people when we saw the potential cuts that would have taken away, terminated outright a third of the projects at NASA Science just overnight.
Mhm.
I'm talking about, missions like New Horizons, beyond in the Kuiper Belt now, or Juno at Jupiter, number of Mars missions, strangely enough, for being a Mars-centric budget. We had, cuts, of course, to vast parts of the Earth science portfolio, functionally ending every single space telescope mission except for
Mhm.
James Webb and Hubble and the brand new ones that just launched. It was really just disastrous. And so, yeah, it's been a very busy year. Um, so we had, there was a number of things. So my colleague Jack Corrali, who's our DC representative, um, and I basically, I think, like a lot of people this year, threw out whatever plans that we thought we had,
Mhm.
and we put together, the Save NASA Science campaign. And I'd say that's been extraordinarily successful. As we record this, we still unfortunately don't have a final congressional budget.
Mhm.
But what we do have is a House budget for NASA appropriations bill and a Senate appropriations bill. And both of them outright reject all cuts to NASA's top line. So that they firmly reject that. The Senate preserves science outright. The House budget would do an 18% cut to science, which is obviously not great,
Mhm.
but way better than 47%.
Yeah.
Um, and that's primarily targeted on earth science.
Mhm.
And so you have a situation where it's very likely that when Congress does pass its final appropriations for the year, you will have a full, most if not full outright rejection of these cuts. And I think a really interesting aspect too is like once these cuts were proposed, no one took ownership of them. There was no vigorous defense of them. There was no working Congress to make sure that these happen. I mean, they because they're not defensible. They're clearly wasteful. They're clearly against the U.S. interest, and they're clearly like counter to U.S. other policy goals of maintaining leadership in space, particularly against China and other nations.
Mhm.
You can't say you're in a space race and then just declare, yeah, but all this other part of space doesn't count. Only the moon counts. It's like,
Yeah.
turning off all of our like outer planets missions is not, while China's building their own. You don't get to say you win a space race that way, or doing Mars sample return, giving up on Mars sample return while China does theirs in 28. But that was kind of it's just this discordant set of policies. And so, I think we had through that, I mean, because it was so obviously bad policy, because it was so obviously wasteful, um, the reception has been very positive to this. And the challenge wasn't so much that convincing people that it was bad, right? I think it's almost axiomatically better it kind of sells itself as being bad.
Yeah.
The trick was obviously, as most people know, there's a lot of other stuff going on this year as well. And so it was making sure that space science didn't get lost in the shuffle of
Mhm.
all the other noise, and that was almost the real challenge. And so there it was trying to see how can we be sticky in the messaging that we have, and how can we continue to focus this in the news, and leverage the tools we have, right? Uh, we're a nonprofit, you're a nonprofit. Um, I'm very fortunate to have a stable, income from this, and but we're still a small team. It's me and Jack, and we just added a new fellow in DC, so it's 3 people now. But we're not spending $1 million a year here.
Mhm.
So what can we do? And so we really took, I think, leveraged a lot of creative approaches with this. We leveraged obviously our CEO Bill Nye as much as possible to gain attention. But we leveraged our members and members like at the Mars Society too to give really clear, actionable, and empowerment to them, so you can take actions but then follow up and have more detailed actions to take. We made a commitment to really being detailed, and we created the Save NASA Science campaign action hub, where we have like 48 updates we've been running throughout the year. That's where like the central repository for talking points, context,
Mhm.
background information. We really leaned into some of the new tools and capabilities provided by artificial intelligence for
Mhm.
developing code, and for as acting as a force multiplier in terms of being able to rapidly turn around new products in terms of sort of an economic impact reports. And then just to be clear, these are not AI hallucinations putting together all these things. Coding partner, very structured kind of categorization, data cleaning, and basic things like that. Um, as a responsible use of AI.
Yeah.
But like it really did accelerate because I do have a software background, and so I was able to basically turn into also a data scientist and architect in addition to the scientist chief policy role. And
Mhm.
so we've been able to publish. We started tracking the Doge cancellations. We created customized economic impact reports just for NASA science for every district across the country. We helped do sentiment analysis reports for every member of Congress, and like what arguments and positions in terms of space would really resonate with them based on their issue statements and stated background with NASA, or presence of district details and spending in their district.
Mhm.
Um, on top of that, we tried to have a really strong social media campaign. We got 9 million views on our Instagram Reels alone,
Mhm.
on Save NASA Science topics. My my other thing was like I would say no to no interview, and so Jack and I did, I think, over 200 media interviews. We placed 1,500 stories. We got a New York Times op-ed, op-ed and payload, op-ed in Space News. We guest hosted on podcasts like Star Talk Radio.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
CNN. Bill was able to go on the. So we had this like full court press. It was actually a very sophisticated and very effective project that we did. We ended up getting nearly 85,000 messages sent to Congress in a single year, a factor of 10 increase over the last couple of years. Um,
Wow.
we other numbers I'm kind of rattling off head. We did a petition, and people from over 100 countries signed our global petition that we hand delivered to Congress. We had helped support the development of the Planetary Science Caucus in the House of Representatives, and we got the first Republican to go on record against the science cuts. It's a Republican and Democratic co-chair of that, and we expanded that caucus this year with a number of new Republican members. We supported them in saying like internal congressional records and congressional letters to each other to promote NASA science as a priority for funding. And the message really did get through. And I think because there wasn't anyone selling it from the NASA side, and we had the data to back this up, and we invested in quality data representation, data visualization, transparency in how we did it, so people could, and then sharing it with a Creative Commons licenses that people could just remix and take and share as they saw fit. Try to literally leverage that in as force multipliers for our message, and just to be really consistent about it. We had 2 in-person congressional visits days in Washington, D.C. The first one had over 100 people. The second one had over 250 people, which I think is the largest single advocacy day for space science in history. Hard to prove that because it's not, but almost like by definition, it just happens so infrequently.
Yeah.
And that was the one particularly with Mars Society and other organizations that we did. So it really was just like this full court press. Like I looked at my, for all you nerds out there, Git commit records. I did the analysis, and I think 55% of my Git commits this year happened before 6 a.m. and after 11 p.m., which I think shows the level of basic insanity that my colleagues and I have been operating at this year. But it's because we really care about it. And so again, we're looking at a congressional reaction that basically gives us as much as we could have hoped for, and it's just getting that across the finish line, which is not. There's clearly other bigger political issues that stand in the way of that sometimes, but I think we're getting really close. And so, but we've seen the administration back off. We haven't seen those cuts terminated, missions terminated prematurely yet. We haven't seen a lot of the worst parts happen. The layoffs, there's very few layoffs, but the departures of NASA's workforce has unfortunately been hard to stop. But a lot has been stopped so far, and so that's really credit to this coalition.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, credit to you and the team at Planetary Society. I mean, clearly that grassroots effort, like using all the tools at your disposal, like the AI you were talking about, putting all your effort into advocating for NASA budget and for those science missions is clearly paying off. Like you said, there hasn't been any preemptive or early termination of some of those missions. Webb and Hubble, and everything is still functioning right now.
Yep.
I think
So far.
Pat yourself on the back that those efforts were fruitful at this point. We put a stop to the bleeding, so it seems, and are starting to heal a little bit, and hopefully we'll see, especially with Isaacman coming in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that's really notable about this too is that the actions that we've seen in Congress, as a reminder, they're from the president's own party. Like they couldn't sell this to their own party. That's how bad these cuts were and how much they didn't make sense. And so, we've been able to really, I think what's been really critical for us is that we've been approaching this in a nonpartisan way. And the party in power, they're the ones who have the control over this. And so we've been able to form very good relationships at the staff level with members about this. And, we've made the effort. We've convinced them in a sense, like we've made the case. And now it's just about finishing the job through this broader political system. But I'd say that's relatively extraordinary too, right? That this is a rejection of the president's in a sense, proposal by the president's own party in Congress for this, and that's not nothing, right?
Mhm.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, yeah, massive tide shift there. Um, yeah, you're talking about social media, and so I
Hmm.
just have to ask, because the way that I originally came across the Planetary Society and joined, got my T-shirt over there, was the Star Trek
Mm.
campaign that originally caught my attention, and so I just have to ask, like, how did you guys wrangle the Star Trek actors to become spokespeople for the organization? Like, how was that collaboration established, and what has been the impact of that? I'm sure it's been successful because it got me. I'm a next gen fan, but yeah, I have to hear a little bit about this
Yeah.
because it caught my attention.
My colleague Andrew will love to hear this because that was his work. Um,
Yeah,
one
successful.
so I think that the real key to that was Robert Picardo,
Okay.
right, the doctor on Voyager, um, is on our board of directors,
Mm,
and
okay.
I actually do not know. He knows Bill and him are buddies, like, they're actual buddies. They shared, like, an apartment in New York City, like, for a while, like,
Oh, they're actual buddies.
they're
Yeah,
real
real
friends, yeah.
friends.
And Bob Picardo is just one of the most interesting, pleasant, fun people to hang out with, who's just so good with a story, has ton of them, right? Because it's obviously his career spans more than Star Trek.
Hmm.
For like I was thinking, I knew him first, I think, from Total Recall and Gremlins 2 for reason.
Yeah.
He's just like such a presence, and he has so many just amazing stories. And so he really wants to help, and he's really committed and respects the Planetary Society. So it was through him that we were able to reach out and engage with a number of those other actors in the Star Trek canon
Mm.
and capture a lot of those recordings. I think that a lot of that happened on like a Star Trek cruise that our
Oh,
staff
wow.
went with him on. And so they've been really great. And through his connections again with the Voyager crew and actors, that's just been a huge opportunity. And I believe, I think, yeah, Bob's new show should be coming out soon, Starfleet Academy.
Hmm.
And so I think there's a whole new generation of Star Trek fans to engage with on that as well. But yes, he's been really wonderful with that. And that shows you, again, I think that finding ways to reach to these audiences who naturally share your inclination, but you got to get someone's attention. And so what a great way to do it. And again, it's just I'm quite tickled that that's exactly what Andrew wanted. I mean, that was the entire thing. So you're a great case study for this. So that's
Yeah.
wonderful to hear.
I think we're in the era of nostalgia. Everybody wants to like reconnect with things that they loved in their childhood, or I'm always looking for fun, funky things online that, oh, I watched this show as a kid, and I still have people, how people have their comfort
Hmm.
show. Maybe it's The Office or Parks and Rec or whatever. Mine's Next Gen. And so when I'm working
Same.
on a slide deck for work or something, I've got that playing in the background. So yeah, that caught my attention. And that's how I originally became a
Yeah.
member. So
No,
yeah,
that's
like
great. Next gen
kudos.
is like a warm blanket on a rainy,
Yeah.
cold day. It's like it's just the pacing of it. One thing I love about this show, let's call it ancillary related to this. When there's a conflict or something happens, right? What do? They don't just jump to action. Let's go and talk about it.
Mhm.
And just like, what show does that? There's like, and so they'll meet in the, Picard's ready room or whatever. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, what do you think? What do you think? And they're like, okay. They'll like get everyone's position and opinion, talk it through, and then Picard, kind of integrates that together. And it's like, what? I just love that they sit down and they think about it
Mhm.
before just reacting.
Mhm.
There's a lesson there for all of
Yeah.
us. But I just love that that's like the core part of that show. It's just,
Mhm.
which modern Trek a lot really doesn't have as much. So I love me some next gen. I'm a sucker for that one.
I love it. Okay, well, we're on the same page there. Yeah, kudos to you guys for coming up with that one. I'm sure I'm not the only one that got bamboozled with those Instagram ads with the Star Trek crew. No, that's wonderful to
Hey,
see that.
I'd say we've done very good job with your membership dollars this year. I'd say a very good ROI so far on that.
Mhm. Well, I'm thinking, ROI and dollars this year. One of the things that I was reviewing before we came on and had an opportunity to talk, going back to just future of NASA and policy, thinking about the Athena document.
Mhm.
Can you kind of highlight some of the main points from the document? Not to put you on the spot to give us a whole AI recap of everything in there, but for those that haven't had an opportunity to review it or don't know the highlights, can you share those from like
Mhm.
major takeaways? And what do you think? How does this align with the future for NASA?
Yeah. Yeah, so Athena document being kinda Jared Isaacman's internal memo of what he would do in the first couple of weeks or months of assuming he would have been, nominated and confirmed for NASA back in June.
Hmm.
Um, yes, that document, very fascinating. It's certainly not written to be you can tell it was not written with a to be publicly shared because it was, too declarative and detailed with what it would change into. You usually don't see that.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it's one of those things I think he says he stands by it, but also obviously a lot has changed, and he says that too. And that was meant to be kind of guidance and decisional. So that I can focus mainly on the science parts because that's just what I've studied the most.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, a lot of it. I mean, and then maybe a little HR thing. I mean, I think correctly it identifies changing the culture at NASA is one of the priorities, and changing the idea like to work at NASA is a privilege, and that if you don't share that view and if you can't deliver and aren't willing to do that effort, you shouldn't work at NASA. It's kind of paraphrasing.
Hmm.
So it's a very again, I think a lot of this just applying that kind of tech entrepreneur mindset right onto this. It's this you're going to be a grind culture, but you're going to do really good things with it. Is kind of the
Hmm.
frame. So it's trying to reframe NASA as where the almost like elite go to be careful. It's not the most popular word, but to go in and do these really great things. And if you're not cut out for it, we'll see it later.
Hmm.
Which I think a lot of people could resonate with. It's funny. It's like it also goes down to granular details. Like meetings should not last more than 15 minutes. If they do, you can just walk out if you don't think you're valuable anymore. Which is that I think that's like an Elon Musk kind of a meeting approach style.
Hmm.
Um, there's which again, I don't like sitting in long meetings.
Who does? Who does?
So I sympathize with that too. It's just kind of as fast as like you have these big kind of big picture things, and then you have these really granular. It calls for streamlining overhead bureaucracy and getting rid of all deputies, right? And trying to streamline the management. All again, I think so. It's like I think all those really on intentions are good, and then it's like how do you do that in a way that's it's a very very radical change for how any government agency, but obviously NASA itself would work. um, on the science side it's not as directed towards it, but they do talk about trying to get more ROIs, science per dollar, time to science reduced, trying to increase the number of small missions at a higher flight and risk rate and fewer flagship. It's a bit contradictory sounding. I think it's hard that this is one of the things I think could use more transparency and discussion on of like how can you do big breakthrough flagship missions on a tenth of the cost? Is that possible?
Hmm.
I've actually done some analysis of this, and the answer so far has been no.
Okay.
Cheap missions, sub 100 million, 150 million and less. Some of them can do decent science, but if you kind of measure them by high impact papers, and or the number of papers that they generate or get cited, they're you don't get much. They actually some of the time to science on those small missions are actually equivalent to a very expensive flagship, just because it takes so long for a paper to get enough to be relevant enough to get enough references to be high impact versus kind of makes up for the difference of just a long development timeline for something like James Webb Space Telescope.
Yeah.
There's actually kind of the sweet spot is this $500 million to $1 billion mission sent to the right place. But then, of course, time to science, how do you measure that? Like, does that mean missions to the outer solar system don't matter, right? Because it takes just physical time to get where you're going.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of the challenge in space science is that you don't have like a specialized, you need like specialized, highly specific, very sensitive sensors and
Excellent.
instrumentation that just do not exist, which is so you have to design and build them.
Mhm.
Things like the James Webb Space Telescope, you're starting with how do we observe this period of the early universe that exists to us as infrared radiation. Um, you have to be able to detect infrared radiation at a really high sensitivity. So therefore, that's why you have a sun shield. That's why you have a closed loop cooling system. And your size means you can't fit inside the frame. So X, Y, and Z, that's why it became so complicated. It wasn't because they
Mhm.
wanted to make it that way. You could
Yeah.
have built 100 Hubble Space Telescopes. They would not give you the science of one James Webb because they could never access that part of the universe.
Mhm.
Um, so how do you do this? And I think a lot of that's TBD. And I think from everything we understand, Isaacman seems willing to learn and revise his ideas of things. But I think it just shows that his heart and soul is kind of on the human spaceflight side. It's what he understands, and I think has that pre-existing interest in the most.
Mhm.
And I hope he'll have folks who can really get him focused on the details of the science side for that
Mhm.
reason. So I think there's, a lot of, I'd say, exciting things in that document. A lot of things I'm, a little nervous about. And I think that's not a unique response to me. I think it was probably just more dramatic than many people realized.
Mm.
But it's an intent to move fast.
Yeah.
Um, and again, some of that motivation may have been mitigated. That was a very early administration Doge kind of influenced framing.
Mhm.
That's not in vogue anymore. Right. And so you have could be different. And of course, to get nominated now, and to get through Senate confirmation, he probably had to make a lot of assurances that that document would not be the baseline application.
Mhm. One of the pieces of that document is regarding Starfleet Academy. So, what do you think of the Starfleet Academy in the Project Athena doc? Are you familiar with that piece?
You'd have to remind me the details of that one.
Okay, I've only heard the bits and pieces of it. It mentions creating one. I think it's somewhat reminiscent of, oh my goodness, Star Trek, Starfleet. There we go.
Mhm.
Putting all those words in one.
Yeah.
Reminiscent of something like that. So it mentions creating like something like a vaguely for civilians in space.
Oh, to try to get civilians into space?
And
Yeah,
they become Starfleet officers
I see.
as they travel in space.
I would have to revisit that part. I clearly don't remember that. I mean, I think there's a lot of ideas in there, right? And I think the idea is trying to both create pipelines and experiences and ways to have people engage with it that aren't just the standard look at a picture, hear some spacey music, right? Trying to
Mhm.
inspire through doing might be a way to frame a lot of the actions, or framing of that document. And so that's and having that kind of framing, again, probably appeals just to kind of the character that he is, right? Of just he likes to do things
Mhm.
and probably can't not do things, right? They're one of those people who can't, again, running however many marathons or flying jets
Right.
around the world and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it's again, so it'll be really interesting. Like the next couple of weeks, I think we might see aspects of that moving forward.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that works in practice.
I didn't mention it earlier, but the question about, oh, if you could enact any space policy, what would it be? And my thought was along the lines of, every mission you need to have a regular person. Of course, there'd be some selection process and training, of course. Similar to Krista McAuliffe, like teacher in space. Somebody is selected so that a normal person gets that experience, and then of course they come back to Earth and they're inspiring
Mhm.
others to support NASA and its
Yeah.
programs. So yeah, including somebody like that if it was a Starfleet type of program.
Yeah. That's
Um,
kind of what, Space for Humanity does. That's
exactly.
kind of
Yes.
their MO. Um, and obviously, Christine McCauley didn't work out great. And so there's like that
Maybe
level of
that's a bad example.
yeah, well, it reminds us, I think it's always easy to talk about risk and assume
Mhm.
more risk, if you're not the person assuming it or living with the consequences of it.
True.
And so that is also now that he is gonna be the one making a lot of those calls, and trying to move fast in what is inherently a domain that is constantly trying to kill you.
Mhm.
Which again, he more than most respects that, having been in it twice.
Yeah.
Um, but there's, that's on his shoulders now. And so there's aspects of that I think we all have to remind ourselves that that's always a constant threat. And we all have to understand that when something does happen eventually, how to manage that, and
Mhm.
whether it was truly an accident or if it was negligence, and the political consequences of which one that is are very different.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, you make a great point there. Yeah, managing and mitigating that risk, it can be easy with the, do more with less and cut here and there and try to get these missions out for as cheap as possible. You leave room for that increased risk. Thinking about the future besides, NASA and the budget and Jared and all those things that we've touched on. What are some of for the Planetary Society? What are some of the most important policy pillars that you're focused on for the next 5 to 10 years?
5 to 10. Well, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I only chuckle because it's like I haven't thought beyond this fiscal year.
You're like, I'm just trying to get through 2025.
It's
Like
I
it's
think
been a
like it's
crazy
getting
year.
through the crisis, though. I mean, I think that's it's mitigating the crisis, but also taking advantage of opportunities to find. I mean, I think the important thing for us is that we're not simply standing athwart the tides of history and yelling stop, right? There should be ways to make things more efficient. There should be ways to make things work better at NASA. We should have high expectations for NASA's contractors. Like, it's absurd that we should accept the mobile launch tower takes 8 years and $2 billion to build, that it should cost more than a mission to Jupiter.
Mhm.
Um, we should have expectations. So it's not just to preserve money for the sake of preserving everything in amber and having it be the same as it always is. And I think ideally we could engage on this idea of what efficiencies can we do
Mhm.
here specifically. Can we talk to actual scientists and say, what makes your job a waste of time? What wastes your time as a scientist getting NASA funding? Which again, I mentioned earlier, has now been intentionally made more high friction to reduce the rate at which they can do their job, right?
Mhm.
But there's all sorts of things that we can do with that. I don't think anyone looks at NASA and says this is a perfect ideal organization as is and has no changes required.
Mhm.
Um, so I would love to meet that moment more creatively, um, and doing so in the context of not extinction level cuts to the most beloved and unique, you know, aspects of our national space program.
Mhm.
So I'd love to. I think my hope is that we can, from a program perspective, really build on the infrastructure that we've been laying this last year, both in the data pipelines analysis and uh, uh, communications and engagement, really leveraging that, and then that our members continue to stay engaged and really developing that relationship, um, so that we can build we're not just I think we're more than just reactive, but really build out the proactive policy development think tank side of the organization, to be able to anticipate and be a part of these discussions more effectively with more detailed solutions
Mhm.
beyond just having to react to the crisis. And I think we've laid a lot of good groundwork for that.
Mhm.
Um, and because I think space policy is a severely underinvested in area. It's a sector of government that spends, if you include the national security side, more 650 to 60 billion a year. There's probably fewer than 20 space policy dedicated jobs and most of those are probably in government.
Mhm.
Most of the other ones are in academia. I'm kind of the weird one. There's a handful of us outside who work for nonprofits. But building that out with more engagement and ideas, I think, has huge returns because it's an area of government that doesn't have partisanship in it.
Mhm.
And it's this old-fashioned concept of government and civic engagement where simply going and making a good argument can still return real results, and you don't hit these walls of partisanship that stop everything. And that's a huge opportunity, right? There's no organized anti-space movement in this country. It's
Mhm.
purely a function of our own ability to persuade and ability to kind of latch into larger national priorities. And I think doing that in a way that's sustainable in the long run and not always reactive to the geopolitical competition of the moment, and having these more kind of intrinsic and sustaining values that are well expressed and well backed by data, is a big part of where we'd like to go. In terms of broader policy, again, I think Search for Life, despite not, not necessarily making it the single organizing goal of NASA space science, really elevating the search for life in a more broad umbrella beyond NASA, to leverage in the capabilities of all these other agencies and their specialties in a way that's really productive and unifying, I think is a doable goal. Building out planetary defense capabilities beyond NASA looking for asteroids, but really building out the technical um, uh, defense aspect pioneered by DART, has big opportunities. And then really just making sure that nothing, hopefully nothing like this happens again, that we don't suddenly say, what if we just single-handedly and pointlessly destroy 60 years of investment to make US leadership in space science? Like that's not a question that we try exploring again, right? That's so absurd in the face that we don't face that situation. So building that out and making sure it's seen as this critical pillar of our security, our sense of identity in this country, and a critical engine for innovation and a pipeline of STEM students, but also, frankly, as you said earlier, it's almost like a source of the sublime, right? It's an accessible. What science can you access feelings like that just by looking at it without having any special training?
Mhm.
Um, like it's really a unique capability that we have, and so making sure that that is seen broadly, and is integrated, into everything NASA does, and that you don't have as much of a stovepipe between human spaceflight and science, unfortunately, as we do now.
Mhm. Well, for those people that are listening, that wanna get involved, that wanna support the search for life, that wanna support NASA, how can they get involved? Where should they go? What
Yeah.
should they
Well, planetary.org is a great place to start.
put that link in there?
Yes, and it's, so it is weirdly cheap, I remember, at the end of the day. But we are, I think, and like Mars Society, we're completely independent, and that independence was absolutely critical this year.
Mhm,
We were able to move fast and say what we believed, about these draconian cuts to NASA science, because we didn't have grants at risk. We
mhm.
didn't have funding at risk. We didn't rely on that, and a lot of organizations didn't have
Outreach.
that luxury.
There we
Yes,
go.
there you go, and you get this great T-shirt.
There we go. Check it out. Oh,
Yeah, the world shirt. And I mean, again, I think we're making really good use of your member dollars right now, because we are being, we're investing in our advocacy program, but we're still very lean, and we're really punching above our weight and really making a big difference through a lot of the coalitions, and partnerships, like what we said earlier.
yeah.
Um, but bringing I'd say a level of sophistication and commitment and savvy, and also just passion, um, that we're really doing, I think, some really important work. So, that's a huge part. So we have our whole advocacy section. We have an online community through that, and then joining us that way I can pitch our next day of action in Washington D.C. Will be April 19th and 20th this year. Planetary.org/day of action. So you can register now. That in-person activity is the most powerful, impactful thing any citizen, or you don't even technically have to be a citizen. You just have to live in the United States and be represented, an address in the United States.
Mhm.
Um, that's really a valuable thing. So those are two good chances. And then, of course, my podcast, Space Policy Edition of Planetary Radio, and my monthly, I should add this to my long list, my monthly space news policy newsletter, The Space Advocate. That's free. You can do that on planetary.org as well.
We'll make sure to put those links in there. So anybody listening that wants to access those can easily find the links there. Casey, thank you so much for joining me and for chatting today. It's been wonderful to get to know you and wonderful to learn more about the Planetary Society. And in all my interactions with Planetary Society, I've been impressed with all the information, the advocacy, everything that you guys do. So just really proud of all the work that you've done this year, and again, you deserve a big pat on the back for all your efforts. And just such a pleasure to finally get to chat with you. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Likewise, a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And we're going to wrap up today's episode. I want to give a quick thank you and shout out our executive director, James Burke, our PR director, Michael Stoltz, Leah, our producer operating behind the scenes. Thank you, as always, for everybody that's tuning in today. And next month, keep an eye out. We're going to, next month's episode is featuring representatives for the Hope Station, the new analog facility in India. Keep an eye out for that episode. Again, Casey, thank you so much for being here today. Going to finish the way we always do. The best is yet to come. Thanks, everybody.